The day we got the keys to our apartment, I stood in the empty living room with a champagne flute in my hand and thought I had finally built something no one could take from me. $2 million of my own money, saved over 12 years of 80-hour weeks, was woven into every square foot of those hardwood floors, into every inch of those floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. I thought the worst was behind us. I had no idea it hadn't even started. Because 2 weeks after we moved in, my mother-in-law, Carol, sat at our kitchen table, folded her hands like a judge preparing a verdict, and told me, with a smile so patient it made my skin crawl, that since Jason had also put in $2 million, we had each contributed equally, and therefore the apartment belonged to both of them in equal measure. By both of them, she did not mean me and Jason. She meant Jason. And whatever Jason chose to do with his half was between a son and his mother, wasn't it? Then she slid a document across my kitchen table. 14 pages, 3 signature lines. Her name was already printed on the third one. My name is Clara Reeves. Until I was 32, I was the kind of woman who believed that hard work was its own protection. I grew up watching my father set aside a portion of every paycheck into a fund he never touched for himself, teaching me, without ever stating it directly, that money was not glamorous. It was freedom. Slow, quiet, unglamorous freedom. So I saved obsessively. I tracked every dollar, brought my lunch to work every day for years, drove the same sensible car for 9 years, and declined vacations beyond my budget while my colleagues went to Bali and Lisbon and came back with tans and credit card debt. By 31, I had $2,400,000 sitting in index funds and a high-yield savings account, a wall between me and the helplessness I'd watched other people suffer without the cushion to absorb the blow. I was a senior financial analyst promoted 3 times in 8 years, never late on a deadline. I did not cultivate drama. I was the steadiest thing in any room I entered. And when I met Jason at a professional conference 3 years before all of this, I recognized almost immediately that he was my opposite in the best possible way. Warm where I was careful, spontaneous where I was structured, the kind of person who fills a room without trying, while I was the person who quietly held it together from the back. He worked in commercial real estate. He proposed on a Tuesday evening while we were cooking pasta, holding a ring box with a look so stripped of his usual easy confidence, so simply nervous, that I said yes before I'd fully processed the question. Carol was a complication I identified early and chose, deliberately, to accept. She was compact, silver-haired, precise, the kind of woman who enters a room like a chess piece moving, always aware of her position on the board. She was not warm to me, but not overtly hostile either. She asked polite questions in the tone of someone taking notes. She complimented my cooking with condescension folded so neatly into the praise that objecting would have sounded unreasonable. Jason said she just needed time, that she'd raised him alone after his father left when Jason was 12, that her identity had been built around him, that she struggled with the reordering that marriage requires. I believed him. I thought, we will find an equilibrium. I thought, she will come to understand that loving Jason and loving me are not mutually exclusive propositions. I was wrong about many things in those years, but I was most wrong about that. The apartment arrived the way the best and worst things do, unexpectedly, all at once. A pre-market listing, the kind you only hear about if you know the right people. Jason and I went on a Thursday evening in October, and I remember walking through those empty rooms with the low autumn light coming through the windows at a long golden angle, feeling something I can only describe as recognition. 1,200 square feet of possibility. High ceilings, hardwood floors the color of old honey, a kitchen with real counter space, a view of the park that would later look, on certain mornings, like someone had painted it deliberately to make the city feel livable. The price was $4 million. I had $2 million available. Jason had roughly $300,000 in savings, but he'd been pre-approved for a mortgage at a favorable rate. We'll each put in $2 million, he said on the drive home, with the clean certainty of a man stating a fait accompli. Perfect split, equal partners. I wired my $2 million from savings. Jason signed for his $2 million in a 30-year mortgage in his name. We bought the apartment in both our names, 50-50 on the deed, and moved in on a Saturday in November with champagne in cardboard boxes and friends who stayed for dinner. For 6 weeks, it was perfect. We arranged furniture and argued pleasantly about the bookshelf. We found the best coffee shop downstairs and made it a Saturday ritual. We had people over and stayed up too late and woke up Sunday mornings with the particular satisfied tiredness of people who are genuinely enjoying their lives. I would come home to find Jason had started dinner, and he would look up from the stove with that specific, unhurried happiness, and I would think, I was careful for a long time, and I did this right. The first strange thing happened 3 weeks after we moved in. Carol came for Sunday brunch and walked through the apartment in her usual manner. Methodical, unhurried, like someone conducting an inventory. I was managing eggs in the kitchen when I heard her say to Jason, pitched just below normal conversational volume, "Good bones in this building, good bones." Jason murmured something I couldn't catch. I told myself it was habit. People from real estate families talked about property the way medical families talked about symptoms. I let it pass. The second strange thing happened 2 weeks later. I came home at 6:15 on a Tuesday to find Carol at our kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad covered in close, careful handwriting. When she saw me enter, her face did something quick and controlled. A flash of surprise she covered immediately with a remark about traffic and a compliment about my coat. Jason came out of the bedroom talking about dinner reservations, and the legal pad disappeared into Carol's bag with a speed that I registered but couldn't articulate. From the doorway, I caught 2 words before it vanished: mortgage structure. I asked Jason later, keeping my voice neutral. He shrugged his whole body shrug. "She makes lists. You know how she is." I did know how she was. I knew Carol made lists the way a general drafts battle plans. But I had no evidence, no ground to stand on. I said nothing. The third strange thing was a question at dinner in December. The 4 of us were at an Italian restaurant: me, Jason, Carol, and Carol's friend Linda, who described herself as a real estate consultant and whom I'd always found opaque. I was mid-conversation with Linda about rate structures when Carol interrupted pleasantly and said, "Clara, the mortgage Jason took, do the payments come from a joint account or from his individual account?" The question landed wrong, the way familiar furniture looks wrong when someone has moved it an inch. On the surface, it was the kind of thing Carol might ask. Underneath it was a more specific question. She wanted to know whether the mortgage was something we shared or something that belonged solely to Jason. I answered, "The payments came from our joint household account." And she nodded with a quiet, smart, that sounded less like a compliment and more like a calculation being entered into a running total. I looked at Jason. He was cutting his bread. He was not looking at me. There was something in the set of his shoulders. That very slight, deliberate tension I had learned to recognize as the posture of a man bracing for a reaction he hopes won't come. I changed the subject. I poured myself more wine. I was still giving everyone the benefit of every available doubt. I was still the woman who tells herself, you can't build a marriage on suspicion. Evidence, as it turned out, was waiting in Jason's home office on a Wednesday afternoon in January. He was away at a 3-day conference, due back Thursday evening. I was working remotely and needed to print a document, and his computer on the study desk was closer. I moved the mouse to wake the screen. The document already open loaded in front of me before I could look away, and the file name was visible in the tab: co-ownership_draft_v3_final_crm.docx. I stood very still with my hand on the mouse. The document was open on what appeared to be the 3rd page, dense with legal formatting. The visible section was titled Article 4, Distribution of Ownership Interests. And beneath it, in the antiseptic language of legal drafting, were 3 names: Jason Mercer, Clara Reeves, Carol Mercer. The distribution: Jason Mercer, 33.3%, Clara Reeves, 33.3%, Carol Mercer, 33.3%, with an option to purchase the remaining fractional interest upon mutual agreement of all parties. I read it 3 times, then a fourth, one word at a time, because my brain refused to absorb it at normal speed. My hand on the mouse had developed a fine, uncontrolled trembling. I didn't notice until the cursor began moving in small, erratic arcs across the screen. My heart was loud and specific, a hard pounding I could feel in my throat, my temples, the tips of my fingers. There was coffee still in the French press in the kitchen, and I could smell it from where I stood. That warm, ordinary, entirely irrelevant smell. And the contrast between that smell and what I was reading was so profound that it felt physically impossible both could exist simultaneously. I scrolled to the cover page. Co-ownership and property rights agreement. Our address. Our apartment. The agreement was dated December 14th, 6 weeks ago, 10 days after we'd moved in. I scrolled to Article 7, Equalization of Financial Contribution. It argued, in the careful, clause-heavy syntax of someone who had paid a lawyer to build this reasoning, that because Jason had taken on a $2 million mortgage with 30 years of monthly obligations, while Clara had contributed $2 million in liquid capital with no ongoing payment burden, the contributions were not equivalent in weight or risk, and a recalibration of ownership was warranted. Furthermore, Carol Mercer had served as guarantor on Jason's mortgage, a fact that constituted both a financial contribution and a material risk exposure, and this warranted formal recognition in the property's ownership structure, the guarantor clause. I stood there and let it land without defense. I had known vaguely that Carol had been involved in the mortgage process. Jason had mentioned it once, briefly, as some documentation thing, using the word paperwork in the casual tone he reserved for things he considered minor logistics. I had nodded and moved on, and now here it was, transformed by someone else's careful planning into the legal foundation of a claim on my home. I scrolled to the signature page. Jason's name was printed beneath a blank signature line, not yet signed, version 3, marked final, which meant this document had gone through at least 2 prior drafts, refined page by careful page, while I was arranging furniture and developing coffee shop rituals and believing with wholehearted confidence that I was building something real. I pushed back from the desk. I walked to the kitchen and put both hands flat on the cold stone counter and stood there breathing. My throat was tight. My eyes were dry in the particular way of someone well past crying and into something colder. I thought about calling Jason. Some version of how could you, some version of the question with no good answer. And then I thought about the blank signature line. He hadn't signed it yet, which meant either he hadn't decided or he was waiting for the right moment. Waiting, perhaps, until I was more financially entangled, more emotionally invested, more inclined to accept a bad settlement rather than risk a worse rupture. I picked up my phone. I did not call Jason. I called my father, the man who had taught me that money was protection, because I needed, in that moment, to speak to the one person in my life who had never once given me a reason to doubt him. He answered on the second ring. I said his name. He heard something in my voice and said, without preamble, "Tell me what happened." So I did. My father listened without interrupting, a skill he had developed over decades of receiving bad news professionally and had apparently decided to apply universally. When I finished, there was a silence on the line that was not uncomfortable, but rather the silence of someone choosing their first word with the same care they'd apply to a surgical incision. Then he said, "Don't touch that computer. Don't move anything. Take photographs of every page with your phone right now while you still have the apartment to yourself. Then call David Harmon. I'll text you his number." David Harmon was a property attorney my father had worked with for 11 years. I had met him once at a Christmas party, a quiet man in his 60s, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent a career watching people underestimate him. I took the photographs. 22 pages in total, including a cover sheet I'd missed on first scroll, an appendix of property valuations, and a timeline of contributions that someone, a lawyer certainly, had formatted with the clean, authoritative precision of a document designed to look like settled fact. Then I sat down at Jason's desk, in Jason's chair, in our apartment, and waited for David Harmon to call me back. He called within the hour. I walked him through everything I'd found, reading sections aloud when he asked, answering his questions with the flat, measured calm of someone running on pure adrenaline and training. He asked about the mortgage, specifically whether I had documentation of my own $2 million wire transfer and whether it was drawn from a personal account predating the marriage. It was. He asked whether Carol's name appeared anywhere on the deed as currently recorded. It did not. He said, "Good. That's your foundation." Then he said something that opened a cold, specific seam of dread down the center of my chest. "Clara, a document this detailed, 3 versions with appendices and valuations, wasn't drafted in 6 weeks. Someone commissioned this before you closed on the property. Before we closed. Before we moved in. Before the champagne and the cardboard boxes and the Saturday coffee ritual and all the careful happiness of those 6 weeks, someone had been planning this while Jason and I were still negotiating furniture arrangements and the location of the bookshelf. I asked David what I should do. He said, 'Nothing yet. Let him come home. Let them make the first move.' The moment Carol presents that document to you formally is the moment you have leverage, because it establishes intent. Until then, you know, and they don't know you know. That is an advantage. Don't spend it early." I said I understood. I put the phone down and sat for a long time in the quiet apartment, listening to the ambient sounds of a building full of people living their ordinary lives. A door closing somewhere above me, a distant elevator hum, the particular creak of our own floors settling in the evening cold. I thought about Jason at his conference, presumably in a hotel room right now, checking his phone, maybe texting me something warm and routine about dinner plans for the weekend. I thought about whether he was on the phone with Carol instead. I thought about the blank signature line and whether he had ever intended to tell me or whether the plan had always been to present this as a done thing, a legal reality I would be invited to ratify rather than negotiate. I did not sleep that night in any meaningful sense of the word. I lay in the bed we had assembled together from flat pack boxes on a Saturday afternoon 3 months ago, listening to Jason's side of it stay empty and cool, and I thought about the specific quality of his confidence when he had said, on the drive home from seeing the apartment for the first time, "We'll each put in $2 million. Perfect split. Equal partners." I had believed that sentence. I had believed it with the clean, unhesitating trust of someone who had no reason not to, who had been trained by her whole adult life to respect precision and specificity in financial agreements and had heard what sounded like a precise, specific financial agreement and had asked no further questions. The irony of it, that my own training had made me easier to mislead, was not lost on me as I lay there in the dark with my eyes open and my hands folded on my chest like someone practicing for a funeral. Jason came home Thursday evening. He had a good trip energy about him, the particular looseness of a man returning from several days of professional success and hotel breakfasts, a carry-on bag in one hand and a box of those expensive chocolate truffles from the airport shop in the other. He kissed me at the door and held up the truffle box with a small, pleased smile, and I received all of this with a performance of normality that I did not know I had in me until I was executing it. I smiled. I asked about the conference. I accepted the truffles and put them on the counter. I cooked dinner and we ate it together at our kitchen table, and I watched him across the table, his easy movements, his fluid conversation, his complete absence of any visible guilt. And I thought, either he is the most accomplished deceiver I have ever met, or he has genuinely convinced himself that what he's doing is not a betrayal. Neither option was comforting. 3 days later, on a Sunday morning, Carol arrived for brunch. She was earlier than usual, 20 minutes early, which was unlike her precisely calibrated punctuality. And she came in with the particular brisk energy of someone who has decided today is the day. She greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek that felt like the formal opening of a procedure, set her coat over the back of a chair, and accepted the coffee I handed her without the customary assessment of its quality. Jason was in the kitchen. I stood by the window with my own cup and waited. Carol placed her bag on the table, opened it, and removed a document that I recognized, though she didn't know that. She set it on the table between us and smoothed it with one hand. A gesture I would return to many times, the absolute calm of that single smoothing motion, the complete assurance of someone who believes she controls this conversation. "I think it's time we talked about something important," she said. Her voice was warm and measured, the voice she used when she was most in control. As a family. I looked at the document. I looked at her. I said, "All right." She walked me through it with the patient thoroughness of someone who has rehearsed this presentation. She explained the equalization argument, liquid capital versus mortgage obligation, ongoing payment burden versus one-time transfer, in terms of weight and risk and fairness. She explained her guarantor role as a financial commitment that deserved recognition. She described the 33% split as not a reduction of my stake, but a more accurate reflection of everyone's real contribution. She used the word family 4 times in the first 3 minutes. She said at one point, looking at me with an expression of such manufactured sincerity that it made my back teeth ache. "Clara, I love you like a daughter. This is about protecting all of us." I looked at Jason. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his coffee cup in both hands. He was looking at a point approximately 18 inches to the left of my face. His jaw was set. He didn't speak. "Jason," I said. He met my eyes for approximately 1 second, then looked at the floor. "I think," he said, and his voice came out thinner than usual as though it had been left out overnight. "I think we should just hear her out, as a family." The silence that followed was very specific. It had texture and temperature. Carol watched me with the patient expression of someone who believes they've already won. Jason examined the floor, and I felt something happen in my chest. Not heat, not the red spiking anger I might have expected, but something cold and extremely clear, like a lens clicking into perfect focus after a long blur. I had been the steady thing in every room for 12 years. I had trained myself, at some cost, to be unshakable. In this moment, I understood that the training had not been for the career I'd built or the money I'd saved. It had been for this kitchen, this table. This Sunday morning, with its smell of coffee and its 2 people who had made a plan about my life without asking me, I said, "When was the first draft written?" Carol blinked, a single very small disruption in her composure. "I'm sorry?" "The document," I said. "Version 3 is marked final. I'm asking when version 1 was drafted." I watched her process that. Watched the calculation happen behind her eyes, the rapid assessment of what I might know and how I might know it. "Before we closed," I said when she didn't answer. "Before we moved in. While Jason and I were still signing papers, you were already commissioning a legal document to take 1/3 of this apartment. And Jason," I turned to him, "you knew. The whole time we were moving boxes and buying furniture and talking about weekend plans, you knew this was coming." Jason put his coffee cup down on the counter with a small, precise click. "Clara, it wasn't meant to." He stopped. He started again. "My mother co-signed the mortgage. She has real financial exposure. She deserves some security. She deserves 33% of a $4 million apartment," I said. "As a thank you for co-signing a loan you could have structured differently." "She couldn't have qualified for the mortgage without the guarantor," Carol said, and her voice had shifted. The warmth was still there, but thinner now, a coating over something harder. "The bank required it, and I took on real risk. That deserves recognition." "It does," I said. "And there are standard legal instruments for compensating a mortgage guarantor. Indemnity agreements, fee arrangements, a limited security interest. A co-ownership claim on the full property is not one of them. Your lawyer knows that, which means this document was not drafted to protect you from financial exposure. It was drafted to transfer wealth." I paused. "My lawyer knows that too." The room went still. Not the comfortable stillness of a Sunday morning, but the taut, held stillness of a moment before something changes permanently. Carol looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not anger, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, a reassessment. She had come in here this morning with a performance prepared and an outcome expected, and I had stepped outside the script, and she was very rapidly figuring out what that meant. "You've spoken to a lawyer," she said. "I've spoken to David Harmon," I said. "He's reviewed the document, all 22 pages, including the appendix." Jason made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The compressed exhale of a man watching a controlled situation become uncontrolled. "How did you—" he started. "Your computer," I said. "You left it open. I was going to print something." I watched him close his eyes briefly. I took photographs of every page before I closed it. David has copies. This was the moment. I could see it happen in real time. When Jason understood that the architecture of this plan, which had presumably relied on my not knowing until the moment of presentation, had been compromised for weeks. Carol's jaw tightened. For the first time since she had arrived, she looked at her son rather than at me. And the look she gave him was not the warm, proprietary gaze I had always seen, but something sharper. The look of someone assigning blame for a logistical failure. "You should have told her," Carol said to Jason, with a flatness that stripped away the last of the family warmth entirely. "You said to wait," Jason said. That sentence landed on the table between all of us like something dropped from a height. He had not said, "I didn't know how." He had not said, "I was afraid." He had said, "You said to wait." Carol had given him a timeline, and he had followed it. My husband, who had proposed on a Tuesday with a nervous look that had undone me entirely, had been following his mother's timeline for the dismantling of my financial security in the home we had built together. I stood up from the table. I was very calm. My voice, when I spoke, was the same voice I used in conference rooms when I had found the error no one else had found. Quiet, exact, unrepeatable. "Carol, I am going to ask you to leave. The document you brought here today will not be signed. David Harmon will be sending a formal response to your attorney by Wednesday outlining the legal position, which, among other things, will note that a pre-closing commission of a co-ownership claim on a property you have no recorded interest in constitutes a potentially actionable overreach. You should discuss that with your attorney before Wednesday." I walked to the door. I held it open. She looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone who has lost a game they believed was already won, then stood, gathered her coat and her 14-page document, and left without another word. I closed the door. I stood with my hand still on the handle and the quiet apartment around me. Behind me, I heard Jason push back from the kitchen table, heard the sound of his chair against the hardwood floor. "Clara," he said. His voice was different now. Not the deflecting murmur of a man running out the clock, but something rawer, stripped back. "I need you to understand, I never wanted this to happen this way. She said it was just a formality. She said you'd understand once it was explained properly. I should have told you. I know that. I know I should have told you." I turned around. He was standing in the middle of our living room, in the apartment we had bought together with our respective millions and our respective certainties, and he looked diminished, not small exactly, but pared down, like something from which the protective coating had been removed. "You should have told me," I said. "And instead, you let me live here for 6 weeks believing we were equal partners, while your mother refined a legal strategy to take a third of what I built. Not what we built, what I built." I paused. "Your mother co-signed a mortgage because you asked her to, and then she leveraged that favor into a claim on my apartment. And you let her, because you always let her, because she raised you alone, and you have never once in your life been able to tell her no, and somewhere in the last 6 months you convinced yourself that your inability to tell her no was the same thing as not having a choice." He didn't answer. He stood there and took it, which was either genuine remorse or the final gesture of a man who had run out of things to say. David Harmon sent his letter on Wednesday. It was 2 pages, impeccably sourced, and it contained a clause that I had specifically requested, a formal notice that if any further attempt was made to assert a co-ownership interest in the property, we would seek damages for tortious interference and emotional distress. Carol's attorney replied within 48 hours with a significantly shortened counterposition that, in the careful diplomatic language of legal correspondence, amounted to a retreat. The co-ownership claim was withdrawn. Carol's name never appeared on any document relating to our apartment again. Jason and I went to couples counseling for 4 months. It was not, in the end, enough. Not because the damage was irreparable in theory, but because every session revealed another layer of a dynamic I had been too in love and too trusting to see clearly. A mother who had spent 30 years being the only important woman in her son's life, and a son who had never developed the architecture to hold 2 loyalties at once. He was not a bad man. That was, in some ways, the hardest part. He was a good man with a structural failure. And the structural failure had expressed itself at the worst possible moment and in the worst possible direction. And I had sat across from him in a therapist's office for 4 months, trying to determine whether the man and the failure could be separated. And eventually I had concluded, with the same quiet precision I applied to everything, that they could not. We divorced the following spring. The settlement was straightforward. I kept the apartment. I had the deed, the wire transfer records, and a document that had, by its own 3-version refinement, demonstrated that Jason's equitable claim on the property had always been contingent on a legal maneuver that had failed. He moved into a rental in the same neighborhood. We were civil. We are still civil in the way that 2 people can be civil when they have genuinely tried to do right by each other, and one of them failed. I still live in the apartment. I am sitting on the window seat right now, the one I had installed in the living room in the year after the divorce. A wide, cushioned ledge along the floor-to-ceiling windows, the place I come with coffee on Saturday mornings while the park below moves through its early routines. The view is the same as it was the evening Jason and I stood here with champagne and called it ours. I have learned to call it mine without grief and without triumph, because neither of those is the right register for a thing you have simply, finally, kept. There is a bookshelf against the far wall in the spot I originally wanted it, before we compromised for the sake of Jason's preference for an open wall. Small things. They add up to a life. My father came for dinner last month and stood at the window and looked at the park the way he looks at things that have cost something and proved worth it. He didn't say anything memorable. We ate and talked about his new retirement hobby and the slightly disappointing basketball season, and he left at 9:30 because he still wakes up at 6, still out of discipline rather than necessity. At the door, he held my face in both his hands for a moment the way he used to when I was small, and I felt, without needing to name it, that this was what the money had always been for. Not the apartment, not the square footage, not the floor-to-ceiling windows, the ability to stand your ground, the ability to lose the things that needed to go and keep the things that mattered, the ability to still be standing, after everything, in a room that is entirely, incontestably yours. Some foundations hold. You just have to be willing to find out which ones.